Welcome to Contradicting the Cosmos, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist, the Cosmic Skeptic. In today's episode, Mr. Cosmic is going to be responding to a video by the redundantly titled YouTuber Rational Religion. Let's see how he does.
I've been made aware of a recent video by the somewhat oxymoronically titled YouTube channel Rational Religion, claiming to have scientific evidence for God. Now, I'm sure I've heard this before somewhere, and, I'm open-minded, but, well, let's just take a look, shall we?
In our last video, we showed that just because you can't see, hear, or measure something, doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in it.
Now, this is a fair point, besides from the fact that it's an obvious straw man and that no atheist I've ever spoken to actually considers the argument that you can't see God to be one of any kind of credibility. But that aside, I think a lot of apologists could take a leaf out of your book, because a lot of them claim that something like evolution, for instance, although you can observe evidence for its happening, you can't observe it directly, and therefore it can't be proven to be true. But in fact, you're right. Certain things can be believed or proven to be true, despite the fact that you can't necessarily observe them directly.
First, I would not be quick to claim that it is a straw man, since they said in their last video, and I doubt you've seen their last video in order to get the context for it. You certainly didn't give the context for it. You're just assuming that they're making a straw man. I would argue that there is no evidence for evolution, so it's not just a matter of you not seeing evolution happen, it's a matter of you not even seeing evidence for it. But we'll get into the finer details of that later.
Dark matter, or love. We all believe in things which you can't break down and put in a test tube.
I think that if we consider the experience of love to be due to chemical reactions in the brain or as a result of evolutionary processes, then we can break it down and we can find out what it's all about through means of biological and chemical experimentation. And the same for dark matter in the realm of physics. We might not fully understand what it is now or why it exists, but given enough time, if we do uncover what it is and why it exists, then I'm sure that we can experiment upon it.
What we are able to do in the future is irrelevant. The point is, you believe in it now, when you can't test it.
If God exists and he's, the creator of the universe, we wouldn't really expect him to be physically measurable because he's not a physical person, like you or John the local milkman, or Mrs. Singh at the post office. It's good to be diverse. Having said this, just because we can't measure God directly, doesn't mean we can't see signs of his existence in his creation. If God did make everything, you would assume that there'd be some fairly obvious signs that he made it.
Yeah, like some kind of historically accurate written account or
document. He was going to say document. I cut him off too early there, because he was about to go into a string of question-begging epithets, and I just did not want to waste my time on them. Anyway, yes, he did write such a book. It's called the Bible. Perhaps you've heard of it.
The Big Bang, aka everything came from basically nothing. Come on, people. That's not normal.
No, it's not normal. I don't think anyone's ever claimed that the universe expanding from a point of infinite mass and density is a normal, everyday occurrence. I mean, it might be. There might be multiple universes or something. Who knows? The Big Bang Theory is commonly misunderstood to imply that something came from nothing. There is nothing within the evidence for the Big Bang that implies that there couldn't have been some kind of cosmic creator. Don't think that just because you believe that the Big Bang happened means that you can't believe in God. Many people believe that the Big Bang did happen and it was God who banged it. In fact, some people argue that since it was discovered that the universe had a beginning at all, that means that God must exist because there must have been some kind of first mover that set it all off. The prevailing wisdom before we discovered that the universe had a beginning was that we lived in a static universe. Einstein himself believed that we lived in a static universe that had no beginning and no end. In fact, that was one of the big problems of his life because that model of the universe didn't quite fit with his theory of relativity. But then since then, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was expanding, Penzias and Wilson discovered CMBR, and a host of evidence has been collected which suggests that the universe did in fact have a beginning around about 13.7 or 13.8 billion years ago. But here's the catch. If you're going to claim that something can exist outside of this universe that set off the Big Bang, well then so can I. And neither of our opinions are more valid. You claim that it was a god, I claim that there could be a multitude of naturalistic explanations, and some have already been postulated, for instance the multiverse theory. The only difference is, because we have no compelling evidence of the multiverse theory, at least not yet, we're not going to make any claims of absolute certainty, because that would be preposterous. And that's precisely what you seem to be doing.
So first he says that he doesn't think that anybody's ever claimed that Big Bangs are normal, and then he immediately mentions multiple universes, which some people believe. There's nothing really in the evidence to suggest that there was a Big Bang. The best you can assume is that the Big Bang is possible, but of course you would still need God both before and after. But there is no conclusive proof that a Big Bang occurred. But if it did, it would have been out of nothing, unless you want to say it came out of God. But Christians don't really say that. God created space, time, and matter where there was none before. You may be able to claim that God just has infinite energy, so all the matter in the universe just came from that energy, but you'd have a hard time explaining where space and time came from. So I would not say the universe came out of God, only that God created it out of nothing. And none of the evidence mentioned in any way implies that the universe is 13 billion years old. The best you could do is get to a maximum age where all the universe coalesces in a single point, but you could never prove that the universe existed that long ago in order to go back to that single point. Not to mention other evidences which limit the age of the universe considerably. A multiverse does not help your case. All it does is kick the can down the road, and you're actually kicking it into the unknown so that you can make an appeal to ignorance, because it is quite impossible to prove a multiverse when we're trapped in our own universe. So you're right, believing in a multiverse would be preposterous.
The universe is expanding, which means it must have expanded from somewhere. We all know the famous song. Take it away, boys.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started.
Now where did that initial
Hot, dense state
come from? If something began, it had to have been begun, right? Us religious folk have always had an answer. We say that there had to have been an eternal entity which always existed, and which begins universes like ours. We call that eternal entity, drumroll please, God.
Of the gaps, just because you can't explain where the universe came from doesn't mean that you can just invoke God. You say you have an answer. You don't have an answer. You have a postulation. You have a hypothesis that's yet to be proven to be correct. You don't know that anything at all existed before the Big Bang. In fact, the question of what came before the Big Bang could be seen as a bit of a non-starter, given that before is a principle of time, and time itself began with the Big Bang. It could be seen as a ridiculous question. But even if you could prove that there was something before the Big Bang, you couldn't prove that it was a god, you couldn't prove that it was omnipotent, you couldn't prove that it was omniscient, you couldn't prove that it consciously created the universe.
Matter and space and time had a beginning. So whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter. So whatever created space, time, and matter has to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, also powerful. Because the being, whatever it is created out of nothing. No space, no time, or matter. Or no space, time, or matter. And then also personal. Why does the being need to be personal? Because in order to make a choice, which is what you have to do in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, you have to be a person. Gravity, an impersonal force, has no power to make a choice. This is why Stephen Hawking, in his book, The Grand Design, on page 181, is wrong when he says, because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. John Lennox, a brilliant philosopher and mathematician from Oxford University, said, when nonsense is spoken by brilliant scientists, it's still nonsense. And so when Stephen Hawking says gravity can create the universe, that's nonsense, because you need a personal force to create. Secondly, gravity didn't even exist. Gravity was created at the Big Bang, so it didn't exist prior to that. So if you've got a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, also intelligent. Why? Again, intelligence is necessary to make a choice. So you've got a being that appears to be a theistic God to create space, time, and matter. Now, it doesn't have to be the Bible or the biblical God. I think when you go further through the evidence, you realize it is the biblical God. But from the cosmological argument alone, you get a being consistent with the biblical God.
You couldn't prove that it created the Earth. You couldn't prove that it particularly cares about a particular species of primate on a particular rock orbiting a particular sun in a particular galaxy, in a particular galactic cluster, in perhaps a particular universe. And you certainly couldn't prove that it disapproves of homosexuality or something. So why do theists so often act as though they can? I've seen tons of convincing arguments for an arbitrary first mover, but nothing for any kind of theistic philosophy. And by the way, if you want to learn any more about cosmology or its history or how we discovered that the universe had a beginning or all the sort of stuff that I'm talking about in this video actually, I couldn't recommend Lawrence Krauss's A Universe from Nothing anymore.
You serious?
I think Frank Turek and J. Jonah Jameson covered the response to that clip well enough on their own.
Atheists are left empty-handed. They're hoping that if they stare at the universe long enough, they'll figure it out. Well, staring at the universe won't tell you about what produced the universe when it didn't exist, so good luck with that.
And neither will staring at religious scripture, or the age-old arguments of Thomas Aquinas.
Darn it, I cut him off too early again. Thomas Aquinas. But yes, they will, because scripture was written by the God who is outside the universe, and of course, logical deductions, such as the unmoved mover, do not require looking at the universe.
2. The fine-tuning of the universe, aka, why are you here? No, really, why? Do you know the story of Goldilocks?
Universe, right?
But the third one was just right. The universe is kind of like that. No, not like porridge. It's just right for life.
You're telling me that this universe, the 99.9% vacuous universe, the universe with the Andromeda Galaxy which is heading on a direct collision course with us, the universe in which the sun will eventually expand into a red giant and consume the Earth and everything that we've ever known or loved, the Earth itself where the majority of the water is undrinkable, where earthquakes and natural disasters routinely ruin people's lives, need I go on? The universe is not finely tuned for human life.
Are you not alive? This argument that because it's possible to die somehow means the universe isn't designed for life would seem to indicate that Mr. Cosmic does not understand the fine-tuning argument. The argument is not that the universe is designed in a way to make life abundant and well protected. It's that it's designed in a way to make life possible. The universe is very much finely tuned for life.
If the early conditions or the basic laws of the universe were even a little bit different, life could never exist. For instance, the following list shows you just a few examples of how sensitive the universe is to change. If any of these ratios changed even a tiny amount, it would be physically impossible for you and I to exist. And that would be a tragedy.
Now this sounds familiar, doesn't it? If you don't already know, my last video was discussing this exact topic, actually, so if you want to see my rebuttal to this kind of argument, go and check it out, link in the description, might be in the related videos. It's my video about dice.
But instead of getting all mopey-eyed about it, we should be asking ourselves, what are the chances? If the universe just popped into existence by accident, whatever that means, the chances would be effectively zero. But if the universe was designed with the specific purpose of producing life, like every religion says, then that would explain a lot, wouldn't it?
Okay, so all of the theistic religions which invoke a supernatural creator, Christianity, Islam, ancient Greek mythology, Judaism, the thousands of religions which do that, could all be correct. I suppose that narrows it down slightly.
Yes, it narrows it down. It eliminates atheism as a possibility, so you should be giving up your atheism, and yet you're not. This argument that he's hinting at is like if you were trying to pull someone out of a burning building, and they say,
"But where will I live?" "No, I'm gonna stay in my burning building, because that's all I know. If you find me a building that isn't burning, then I'll come out. But until then, I'm just gonna stay right here."
3. Origins and evolution, aka stardust turns into little cells, that turn into little people. Aww. Did you ever play with Lego? If so, let me ask you a question. If you take a box of broken up Lego and shake it up, how likely is it that a Lego building drops out? Or a Lego helicopter? Or the Lego movie Batman, walking, talking and busting up criminals? Pretty unlikely, right? Because we all know that to make any of these things, you need very specific configurations of building blocks that work together to produce a useful outcome.
Okay, but say I randomly arranged some Lego and it created some kind of arbitrary structure, and then I assigned some kind of meaning to that after the fact. That wouldn't be so amazing, would it? I mean, if the configuration had been any different, then that meaning wouldn't make any sense. But that's not very extraordinary because, of course, I applied that meaning. And that's precisely what we've done with the universe, too. The only reason that the current conditions of the universe are extraordinary in any way is from a viewpoint of anthropocentrism, that we are important, that the universe wanted or needed for life in our form to exist, which it certainly didn't. And
Humans do not arbitrarily assign purpose to the universe, or the things in the universe. The Lego house, for example, the meaning for that is that it is a tiny house, much like the house we live in today, which itself has meaning and purpose. It protects us from the outside. If you were to arbitrarily assign meaning to a random clump of Legos, you would not be doing it based on what they can do. You would be basing it off your own imagination. We do not apply meaning. We discover meaning. We discovered that the universe is finely tuned for life, and that the chances of that happening naturally by random chance is so astronomical that saying there's a chance it could have happened is intellectually dishonest. I hope I made that clear.
We can all learn a lot from Lego. Just as we know it's practically impossible for building blocks with no will of their own to come together to produce useful and interesting things, we also know that dead chemicals should not be able to arrange themselves into living systems. And yet, that's exactly what we see.
yes, that is exactly what we see, which means that it does happen. Have you ever heard of natural selection? I know there are a lot of people out there who deny it, but I'll tell you what, let's look at a logical way to try and prove that natural selection did happen. Now, many creationists, or just people who are bewildered by the idea that one species might be able to evolve into another, often bring up the contention that perhaps this kind of evolution by natural selection does happen on the micro scale, but not in the macro scale, or in other words, it happens on the small scale, but not on the large. Now, I've heard a lot of people say this, but to me it just sounds like you're saying that, you know, a hike of 30 miles, you don't believe that a journey on foot of 30 miles could take place because a single step is only about this big. Well, yeah, of course, but if you take the individual small steps and you put them together, you get the entire journey. And hey presto, that's how evolution works.
I think there may be some miscommunication in the "that's exactly what we see" part. What we exactly see is living creatures made out of non-living chemicals and materials. Non-living chemicals and material cannot randomly produce living chemicals and material. The analogy is false because you're walking in the wrong direction. You could never walk 30 feet in front of you walking backwards.
The chance arrangement of DNA to produce even a simple protein is mind-bogglingly unlikely.
Not if you consider that this protein has had billions of years to evolve gradually to the complexity that we see today in such a way that makes it fit within its environment rather than being designed to fit within an environment. Then it's just natural selection and makes perfect sense.
Wow. Now, can anyone get their mind around a number that big? There's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the entire universe. There's only 10 to the 16th seconds since the Big Bang. There's only 10 to the 139th total events since the beginning of the universe. Now you're starting to get the understanding of why people are very skeptical that the chance hypothesis is going to do the job. Now, you may have heard just the opposite. Has anyone ever gotten in a discussion with you about the origin of life and said, hey, it happened by chance? I mean, do you hear that? I mean, this happens to me. I'll be lecturing in hostile university environments, and I'll get done and somebody say, well, but, and they want to argue with me about the probabilities. And I just shut the discussion down because I say, no serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. It's always going to be more probable that it didn't happen by chance than it did. And with that kind of reasoning, you realize it's time to move on and look at some other options.
Now imagine millions of these proteins working together in millions of cells to produce living beings like you and I.
I don't have to imagine it. I can see it with a microscope, and I can understand how it happened by learning about evolution.
If you honestly think that this is the product of random processes, then perhaps you need to go back to the Lego box.
Or perhaps you need to go back to the biology classroom to realise that natural selection is not a random process. Natural selection is a non-random process which capitalises upon random genetic mutations.
In an atheistic universe, natural selection is very random. You can have all the genetic advantages you want and still die before you are able to pass on your genes. You may not even die. You may just not reproduce. You have this great mutation that helps you to survive, but nobody wants to sleep with you. So that great mutation is lost forever.
You know, natural selection does not explain why we find animals that are suited to their environment. It only explains why we do not find animals that are not suited to their environment. Think about that. It's different. Why do we find animals that are suited to their environment? Because God created animals with certain abilities so that they would be well suited to their environment.